Mama Murdered a Podcast. I'm your host, AB.
And this week on Mama Murdered a Podcast, we're covering the case of Erin Caffey. Erin helped plot and kill her entire family in a house fire. This case is insane, and I haven't seen it covered in a lot of places, so strap in, it's going to be a wild ride. So with all that being said, and without further ado, let's get it. Erin Caffey was born on July 27th in 1991. She was born to her parents, Penny and Terry Caffey. And fun fact about her dad, Terry, he was actually training to be a minister. And Penny and Terry would go on to have 2 more kids together, 2 sons. They had a son named Tyler Caffey, who was just 8 years old at the time, and Matthew Caffey, who was just 13 years old at the time. And all of the Caffey kids grew up in a super religious household with a healthy example of what a relationship is supposed to look like. Both Tyler and Matthew Caffey were very much into playing instruments and music, and just very much into the typical boy things. And Erin had a love for singing. Her go-to song to sing was Amazing Grace, and watching videos, she was actually pretty good. Erin sang for her church family during Sunday morning services, and since she was a small, cute teenager, a lot of the teenage boys in town would come to church just to see Erin. And later on, some of those same teenage boys would actually attribute their relationship with God to Erin because she was the reason that they had started going to church in the first place, and then in the process, they ended up finding a relationship with God. The family lived in Alba, Texas, which was a tiny town, and everybody that knew Erin said that she was always a responsible, lovable, easy to be around kind of person, just a good kid in general. The Caffey kids went to public school until Erin was about 13 years old, and that's when Penny decided to homeschool all 3 kids. So I'm not actually sure how much public school Tyler and Matthew experienced because they were younger than Erin. But either way, Penny decided to homeschool all 3 of the kids. And the reason that Penny decided to start homeschooling was because of an incident that happened at the public school that Erin went to. A girl at Erin's school had tried to kiss her, and of course, her extremely religious parents were mortified. That's when they pulled the kids from public school and they started homeschooling shortly after. So, like I keep mentioning, the family was extremely religious. So, Penny did a lot of things like charity work. She did things like drive for a charity to deliver food to the elderly or disabled, and she was extremely talented as far as being a seamstress goes. The family was always extremely involved in their church and church activities, and it kind of seems like one of those situations where their church family was their chosen family. And the Caffey family was a lot like something you would see in a Lifetime movie. They were like the all-American, tight-knit family with very traditional family values and beliefs, much like you would find in a lot of small religious towns. And the Caffey kids were probably more sheltered than most kids. And as we all know, most teenagers are naive and they think they're grown, but, these kids were extremely sheltered. Erin's dad, Terry, delivered medical supplies and equipment, but like I mentioned, he was in the process of becoming a minister, and he was just kind of working this job to, provide for his family until he could actually achieve his dream job. And I know that the term typical family is, super controversial because what is normal? What is typical, But in this case, I mean a typical family in the sense that dad works and provides and mom stays home and takes care of the kids, house, family chores, kids, etc. Now, in 2008, at the time of the incident, Erin was 16 years old, and she had been voted most likely to succeed and most fun-loving person in her summer camps and groups that she attended before this incident happened. Now, Erin had been dating a boy named Charlie Wilkinson, and the 2 were in typical teenage love. Because as we all know, when you're a teenager, your feelings are so much more intense, all-consuming, and it's more intense and crazy feeling than anything you've ever felt in your life before. And these 2 were no different. They were completely enamored with one another. They were convinced that this was true love, and they were even planning their lives together. Now, Charlie was a little bit older than Erin. He was 19 years old, so there's a 3-year age gap, which doesn't seem like a big deal until you start talking about younger kids. Because I feel like the maturity level of a 16-year-old and the maturity level of a 19-year-old are two very different levels of maturity. And then maybe not. It really depends on the teenagers. But, I mean, it was a 3-year age gap either way. And that's not to say that Charlie was a bad kid or a bad influence or anything like that. But it does sound like the two had a very different kind of upbringing. Erin was raised in a church every time the doors opened and was pretty sheltered from having to learn to be, like, street smart. And Charlie seems to have grown up a lot like everybody that I know. They grew up in a broken house and depended on friends as parents just as much as they depended on their own parents. Charlie liked to hunt and ride four-wheelers, regular, typical teenage things. And naturally, as it happens, when Erin started spending more time with Charlie, that also meant that she started hanging out with Charlie's friends more often also. And Erin and Charlie had met when he came into her job at Sonic, where she was rolling around on skates serving him food. The episode of Killer Couples that I watched said that Charlie had even given Erin a promise ring that had belonged to his grandma. So already things seem to be moving pretty quickly, especially for a 16-year-old. Now, Erin's dad, Terry, had gotten Erin an older model pickup truck when she turned 16, and sometime after that, she had asked her parents to let her rejoin public schools, and they did finally agree. Now, Terry and Penny didn't really think much of Charlie or their relationship between he and Erin, and they were kind of gonna keep their nose out of it and just let it pass, which was the smartest thing they could have done, honestly, because more times than not, when you tell a teenager no, especially in a relationship like this, where it's like all-consuming, it normally just makes them want to do it even more. Trust me, I was this 16-year-old. So they were just kind of hoping that maybe if they just let her see Charlie, that they would eventually break up over regular teenage things, like most teenage relationships end. They would give it a few months and just kind of hopefully it would pass. But the relationship didn't end, it actually progressed. So when Erin's grades started slipping, that's when Terry and Penny decided that they should probably take a closer look into Charlie, just to see what kind of guy their daughter was spending so much time with. So Penny went to their local library one day when she looked up Charlie on MySpace. Shout out to the OG, the best social media platform. The way things are with TikTok, I feel like we would have blown MySpace up by now, but moving on. So anyways, Penny goes to Charlie's MySpace account and she pulls up pictures and posts of Charlie drinking and smoking and using language that she didn't believe in using. And there were even posts that she saw where Charlie was kind of talking about how many different sexual partners he'd had. And this was way, way, way out of the realm of what they were expecting from a guy that their daughter was dating. So they did their parental thing. They sat down with Erin, they told her that she wasn't going to be able to see Charlie anymore, and they'd even taken Erin's phone away to try to keep her from keeping in touch with Charlie. And according to Erin's dad, Terry, during an interview that he did with Killer Women, Erin took this way better than I would have expected. Once her parents told Erin that they didn't want her to see Charlie anymore, she basically just told him that she had been trying to break up with him anyways, but she just didn't know how. So Penny and Terry weren't even really worried about it at this point. They thought this was the end of it. But I also read a few articles that said that Erin was openly upset and pissed off about it. But I'm believing what came out of her dad's own mouth, so that's what we're going to go with. But before Penny and Terry told Erin that she had to stop seeing Charlie, she had already gotten pretty close with Charlie's friend group. All these people that she had met through Charlie that she had been hanging out with. And some of those people were an 18-year-old girl named Bobby Johnson and a 20-year-old guy named Charles Wade who had an infant baby that he was trying to gain custody of. Now, Charles Wade was trying to come up with a way to make $2,000 quickly to pay for the lawyer for his custody agreement. He had also already been married and divorced, but was still in the early stages of dating the 18-year-old girl, Bobby Johnson. So we have Bobby and Charles who are together, and Erin and Charlie who just broke up, supposedly. And all four of these kids think that they're in love. They think that they know everything already and they don't really need advice from anyone, which is pretty typical for that age. What Terry and Penny didn't know was that when they had forbade Erin from seeing and dating Charlie, that she had already started masterminding a plot to kill her entire family in the name of teenage love. So Erin Caffey and all three of her newfound friends would all be arrested after Erin's whole family was brutally murdered, and when the house that the Caffey family lived in was set ablaze and burned to the ground. But Erin would be found safe and sound, although she was drugged and disoriented, and she was found with her boyfriend Charlie the morning after her entire family was murdered and her family home was set ablaze. But how? So let's get into it. Erin had been plotting and planning this family massacre for some time. Even at her grandpa's funeral, that was weeks before the attack. Erin believed that this was the only way that her and Charlie would be able to be together without her parents trying to stop them, because her parents had also made her break up with the last boyfriend that she'd had. Now, Erin's boyfriend Charlie had promised Charles Wade, who was the one with the baby that was needing money for the lawyer. Right. So Charlie had promised Charles $2,000 if he helped kill Erin's parents. So that would be an easy way for him to get the $2,000 that he needed to pay for the lawyer for his custody battle. Erin had even told both of the men that they would find part of the money that Charlie had promised Charlie and any valuables in a lockbox inside of the house. She even told them where they could find the lockbox. And Bobby Johnson, who is Charles Wade's girlfriend, well, they would use her car to drive to the Caffey house to commit these murders. So all four of these kids, although they're not really kids because they know right from wrong, especially in a case like this, but all four of these kids are on board with this plan that Erin has thought up, which is insane. But on March 1st in 2008, at around midnight, Erin's boyfriend Charlie, his friend Charles Wade, and his girlfriend Bobby Johnson all pulled up to the Caffey house. And as they pulled up, the Caffey family dog started barking and going nuts. And of course, this spooks everybody and they drive back off. Erin quickly called Charlie to tell him to come back and that she could keep the dog quiet. And there are tons and tons and tons of calls back and forth between Charlie and Erin that night. So all three of them pull back up in the car and Erin sneaks out of her house. All four of them drive around for a while and they park in a graveyard according to the Killer Women episode that I watched. Now, while they're in this graveyard, Charles Wade and her boyfriend Charlie both ask Erin if she had changed her mind yet and if she wanted to back out of the plan to murder her entire family in cold blood. Erin literally laughed this question off, telling them that it was too late to turn back now and that they had already come too far. Even though they hadn't actually done anything illegal yet, she felt like it was too late to back out. So Charlie and Erin even get into like a little bit of a verbal argument about this, because Charlie told her that it would be easier if they just ran away together. And she just told him that basically she wasn't going to argue with him, they were just going to do it. Now, any one of these four people could have easily changed their minds, told her no, tried to talk her out of it, or absolutely refused at any point during this night. Or they could have even tipped the police off about the family being murdered, but they didn't. They all went right along with Erin's crazy-ass plan. They all four sat in Bobby Johnson's car and figured out how to get into the house and what each person would do once they got inside. And the plan that they all settled on was that Erin's boyfriend Charlie would kill Erin's parents, Terry and Penny, and that his friend Charles Wade would kill Erin's two younger brothers, Matthew and Tyler. So the only person in this whole friend group that has a kid is going to be the one to brutally murder somebody else's kids. Because logic? Question mark. So at this point, Terry and Penny are sleeping in their beds. Their two sons, Matthew and Tyler, were asleep in their beds. And I'm sure that they assumed that their daughter Erin was also asleep in her bed. But she wasn't. Erin was actually sitting in her own driveway in the car with Bobby Johnson while Charles and Charlie went inside of her house to slaughter her entire family. And Erin was the mastermind of this entire plan. But she wasn't going to be the one to get her hands dirty. It was just too easy for her to manipulate everybody else into doing her dirty work. Erin had already left the front door open for the men when they'd picked her up and drove off to the graveyard to finish planning. So both men had a .22 caliber pistol, but both of them also had a samurai sword, which seems like a weird combo, but what do I know? I'm not a monstrous murderer, so maybe this is normal. Charlie makes his way to Terry and Penny's bedroom, and Terry would later say that he assumed that it was his youngest son coming in because he'd had a nightmare. But instead, it was Charlie who immediately opened fire on Terry. Terry's body was being riddled with bullets, and Charlie had shot Terry first and multiple times because of course you would want to take out your strongest opponent first. Charlie then starts firing shots directly into Penny, and then his gun jammed. But don't panic because his boy Charles comes to the rescue and manages to get the gun unjammed. But while Charles is unjamming the gun, Charlie uses his samurai sword to slash Penny across her throat. This slash would almost completely decapitate her. And of course, with all of these gunshots going off, both Matthew and Tyler had woken up. And it seems like they kind of realized what was going on after they'd woken up, because both boys were screaming and crying for their parents. But somehow in this chaos, these really young kids were thinking clearly enough to lock themselves inside of their own bedroom. It would later be discovered that Tyler was actually found dead hiding in the closet in his bedroom, and that Matthew had attempted to fight off his attackers, which is a disgusting phrase considering we're talking about literal children and then grown-ass men. But what Charles and Charlie didn't know was that Terry Caffey wasn't dead. He could actually hear his son screaming and asking, quote, "Charlie, why are you doing this?" So now Terry's registering that this has to be his daughter's boyfriend. Both of the boys knew his name. He had hung out at their house. He had eaten dinner with them at their family's kitchen table on more than one occasion. And sadly, both Tyler and Matthew and their mother Penny were all killed that night. Matthew had been shot in the face, and Tyler was stabbed with the samurai sword by both men, which never made a lot of sense to me. Why do they both need to stab him? And as if that wasn't enough, Charlie and Charles used a big lighter that they had bought earlier that night to set the house on fire. The house would eventually burn for so long that the roof would cave in on the entire house, and it would basically just be a huge pile of ash left on the ground. Now, when the men leave outside of the house and they get back into the car with their girlfriends, Charlie, Bobby, and Charles claim that Erin allegedly said, quote, "I'm glad that's over." And then something to the effect of, quote, "Holy shit, that was awesome. Babe, you didn't do anything. You just manipulated two men. That's it." The two men told both the girls all of the gory details. Charlie, Charles, and Bobby would all later say that Erin was kind of giddy and excited when they were relaying all of the shit that they had done to her family back to her in the car. Erin and Charlie got dropped off at Charles Wade's trailer, and Erin and Charlie would hang out and even have sex once they got back to his trailer. This almost seems like celebration sex to me. I can't think of another way to describe it, and it's sickening. But when Dr. Phil interviewed Erin and asked what was going through her head while they were having sex, she just said, "Well, I didn't like it." Huh? Honey, that wasn't even the question. And this is something that Erin does a lot in interviews. She just avoids the question altogether. At around 4:30 in the morning, the police get a call about the shootings that took place at the Caffey home, and the caller says that the Caffey's house was also on fire. And the call came in from the Caffey's neighbor. Now, this town is so small that the officer who got the call was actually the only officer on duty in the entire town in those early morning hours. And as the officer drives up to the Caffey house, he can see the orange glow from the fire as he's driving to the house. And this isn't a town where houses are sitting on top of each other. This is rural, middle of nowhere Texas. They had neighbors, they just weren't sitting on top of each other. It's like some of those cookie cutter houses where all the houses are the exact same. It wasn't like that. When the police got to the neighbor's house, Terry Caffey was laying on the floor covered in blood. Terry was alive and at the neighbor's house, and I still don't know how he was able to survive this. Terry had been shot 5 times, once in the head, twice in the back, and twice in the shoulder. And it would take him about an hour to get to his neighbor's house after he managed to escape his house on fire. So somehow he had managed to get out of this house that was blazing with 5 gunshot wounds, cross a creek, almost drowned, and still make it to the neighbor's house that was about 500 feet away. And 500 feet doesn't seem like a long way, but in the condition that he was in, and after hearing his sons cry for him and not being able to do anything about it, with his injuries and all this trauma, I don't know if I would have had the willpower to make that 500 feet. But he did. Terry says in every interview, though, that the only thing that was going through his head was the fact that he knew exactly who it had been that had killed his entire family. And that he had to stay alive long enough to at least be able to tell police who it had been. So it sounds like Terry didn't even think he was going to make it. He just needed to make it to tell somebody that he knew exactly who this had been. Luckily, though, Terry was able to tell the police and the neighbor both that it had been his daughter's ex-boyfriend, Charlie Wilkinson. And this is such a tiny town. This is one of those places where everyone knew everyone by name and where they lived and what they drove. It's just like the town I live in. And something that would make the investigation a lot easier was the fact that this was such a small town. There had only been 1 officer on duty that night, so other officers were called in to help. One of those officers that rode with Terry to the hospital in the ambulance actually knew Charlie Wilkinson, and Charlie and his son were actually friends. So this officer that had rode with Terry in the ambulance on the way to the hospital was able to tell the other officers that were doing the investigation that he had seen Bobby's car parked outside of Charlie's trailer on his way to the crime scene. So the police go question Charlie, and he swears he doesn't know what happened. He didn't have anything to do with this. And they told Charlie that they would need to take him to the police station to question him since Terry had already identified him as one of the shooters. Of course, they didn't tell Charlie that Terry had survived and that he'd already identified him. Not just yet, anyway. And as for the $2,000 that they were supposed to get, they only ended up getting about $375. Come on now. Now, while the police were at Charlie's house, letting him know that he would have to come back for questioning, Charlie was in a pair of jeans with no shirt and shoes. So one of the officers goes to grab his cowboy hat that he normally wears and a shirt for him. They notice that his boots have blood splatter all over them. So naturally, this was enough for them to get a search warrant. And when one of the officers went into the house, they found what the officer said he thought was a wig or a doll laying on the ground. But the room was dark and there wasn't a light switch that turned the light on in the bedroom. So one of the officers pulled down one of the blankets that was hanging over the window just to kind of let some light in. And there were shell casings all over the floor when they moved the blanket. Now, when he went to pick the blanket up and look under it, it turns out that it was Erin Caffey sleeping. And it said that she looked like she was kind of out of it, and she was acting like she was in shock, and she wasn't even really speaking to them. Erin does tell them that her name is Erin Caffey, and that all she remembers from the night before is that she woke up in her house and it was filled with smoke, and that she woke up to the officers picking the blanket up. She had no idea how she got there, whatever. So the officers kind of started to wonder if maybe she hadn't been drugged and kidnapped and brought back to Charlie's trailer against her will. And then one of the officers started to wonder something else. If Erin had woke up with her room engulfed in flames, why didn't her clothes smell like smoke? The house was completely burned to the ground. She would smell like smoke if she was even on the next road over from where that fire was. But they let that go for now, and they take Erin to the hospital. Now, Erin was completely shocked when her grandma came in her room at the hospital to let her know that her dad had survived. Because at this point, they were just doing a routine medical evaluation on Erin to make sure that she was okay. They had no idea that she was involved yet. So they tested her blood for drugs, and they checked her lungs for smoke inhalation. And what do you know? Both of those things came back negative, which is weird. Especially if you woke up in your bedroom that was engulfed in flames. The police had taken Charlie to the station to interview him about what had happened after they searched his house and found Erin's purse with her driver's license in it. They had also found a used condom in Charlie's room under a few shirts and other clothes, from their celebratory sex shenanigans. And Charlie just kept claiming that he didn't have anything to do with this. But once the officers told Charlie that Terry Caffey had survived both the attack and the fire, and that Terry had been able to identify him as one of the murderers, Charlie just spilled the freaking beans. He told police that Erin was the one that wanted her entire family dead so that they could be together, and that they could do that freely without her parents' intervention. Charlie also told the police that he had tried to talk Erin into just running away with him, but that she had told him no, that she wanted to kill her entire family, that would be the only way. And as it turns out, Erin had even asked her ex-boyfriend to kill her parents, but luckily he took it more like a joke and like her blowing off steam. So this was always her plan, she just had to find the right guy. And when police talked to Bobby Johnson, she kept her I didn't do it spiel up until they told her that Charles Wade had already told them everything. And I don't know if maybe this was her way of trying to protect all of them, but that kind of blew up in her face once she realized that they already knew everything that there was to know. So the police got accounts from all four of these teens, and for the most part, all of their stories matched, except for Erin's story. Charlie, Charles, and Bobby all had pretty much the same story about what had happened that night, but Erin had a different kind of story than the other three teens. Bobby started out telling the officers that she and Charlie helped kill her parents because they were abusive, and that they would punch her and slap her. So all three of these accomplices also thought that she was being abused when she very clearly was not. So once the officers were starting to learn the truth, one of them asked Charlie if he thought that Erin was worth all of this, and Charlie just kind of shook his head and looked at the ground and said, "I don't know." So he did all of this for a woman that he doesn't even know if she's worth it. Now, Erin told Dr. Phil that she knew that they were going in to kill her parents, and that she knew that her brothers being murdered was a good possibility, and that she wanted these murders to happen. But when investigators asked the men why Erin's brothers also had to die, both men said that they told Erin that they were going to have to kill her brothers too, so that there weren't any witnesses, and that Erin allegedly responded to this by saying, "I don't care, just do what you gotta do." When Dr. Phil asked Erin about a statement that Charles Wade said when they pulled off from the Caffey house, that Erin was, quote-unquote, happier than a kid at Christmas, Erin denies that she wanted her little brothers dead, but that she also didn't want them to have to grow up in the foster care system. So, I'm going to leave it alone. But all three of the accomplices said that it was Erin's idea to kill her parents, and that they had all three tried to talk her out of this multiple different times. And Erin was the only one out of all four people responsible for these deaths with a different story. Even Bobby Johnson's cellmate gave a written statement saying that she and Bobby talked about the murders, and that even when Bobby was talking to someone that she thought was her friend, Bobby still said that it was Erin's idea and that she wanted her entire family dead. Now, Charlie Wilkinson and Charles Wade, who were actually the ones that pulled the trigger and caused the deaths, were both given life sentences without the possibility of parole. Erin was given a life sentence, but she will be eligible for parole after she serves 40 years. And Bobby Johnson ended up with the same exact sentence that Erin got. And at first, Terry was asking for the death penalty on the two men, but after a while, he said that he decided that his faith was stronger than his anger, and he asked the judge to sentence them accordingly. Terry has forgiven all four of the teens and still remains close with his daughter Erin to this day. Which, I get it's your kid, but I don't know. I don't know how you would handle this. So props to Terry for being a badass dad, I guess. Erin's therapist, who she sees in prison, legit said later on during an interview with Morgan Pierce that Erin was probably the most dangerous person that she had ever come across. She was not from an abusive household. She was not from the typical upbringing that you would normally see for this type of violence. And it just kind of makes you wonder, how does something like this happen to a family like theirs? I just don't get it. And I think that's all I have for you this week. I'm really sorry this was such a short episode, but this past week has been crazy. I've had a wedding, a funeral, a gender reveal, a sick kid, and a sick husband all in the last 5 days. So bear with me. I'm working on it. If you are a Patreon member, I'm considering stopping the Patreon because it seems like I cannot find the time to research, record, and edit an extra episode. And at this point, I feel like I'm just taking your money, which is that's not cool. So I'm going to work on this week and see if I can get a few Patreon episodes together and go ahead and get those done. And if not, we'll try again at a later date. Not a big deal. I'll even send your money back. No biggie. Let's do a review of the week because I felt like a complete dumbass yesterday. I was checking Apple to see if there were any new reviews, and I saw a little button that says, select your country. I was only reading reviews from the U.S. I had no idea that the separate ones went to a separate folder. So, we have a review from all the way down under, mate. I'm sorry, I'll never do that again. Australia, that's where this review's from. And I was pumped up when I saw it. This review comes from Ketaki, maybe? KET-AKI. The caption says, let's get it. And the review says, lots of love from Australia. I totally love listening to your podcast, and the cute accent really helps. Thanks for all the hard work so we can enjoy the end product. No, thank you. You just made my whole freaking week, and you have no idea probably. So before I sign off, let me just remind y'all, we still have merch, and whatever's there is what is left. So go get your merch. Okay, I love you guys so much. Let's do it again. Same time, same place, next Wednesday. See you then.
That's how my mama murdered a podcast.